In a recent parliamentary session, tensions between Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and opposition leader Pierre Poilievre hit a new high. The conversation focused on climate change, taxation, and the economic burden on Canadians. Still, it swiftly escalated when Poilievre made a sharp comment ordering Trudeau to Google it, resulting in a heated debate.
Google it. Look it up. It's on the Parliamentary Budget Officer's website. You don't have to believe me, and you certainly don't want to believe him.
Poilievre opened the discussion by discussing the growing cost of living for Canadians, which he linked to the government's policies, notably the carbon tax. He said that although presented as an environmental program, the carbon price was nothing more than a tax package that disproportionately punished working-class Canadians. He highlighted a study by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, claiming that the carbon tax would cause the typical Canadian to pay almost $1,500 more in taxes than they would get in refunds. This, he said, demonstrated that the government was deceiving Canadians about the advantages of its climate policy.
He appointed, which demonstrates that the average Canadian will spend at least $1,500 more in taxes than they get back in rebates. The Liberals call this report a prop. It's from the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the one they appointed. They're called facts. Will he finally listen to them?
Poilievre was visibly frustrated as he accused Trudeau of spreading disinformation. He jokingly recommended that Trudeau restrict himself, citing the Prime Minister's previous vows to battle disinformation policy. His scathing comment about the cost of Trudeau's New York hotel room fueled the flames, insinuating that the Prime Minister was disconnected from the financial problems of regular Canadians.
He said $900 and something. I thought for a moment that that was the price of his New York hotel room. I thought, no, that can't be true. It'll be in the thousands. But Mr. Speaker, he's spreading disinformation again. He promised he was going to censor misinformation. Why doesn't he censor himself? Because
in a statement, Trudeau attempted to move the attention back to the issue of combating climate change. He accused the Conservative Party of intentionally misinterpreting statistics and deceiving the people. Trudeau said that the majority of Canadians benefited from the government's climate measures, especially in areas where pollution pricing was implemented. He emphasized that the refunds have improved the financial situation for 8 out of 10 people in these locations. However, Poilievre was quick to respond, claiming that Trudeau's unwillingness to address the true financial effect of the carbon price was the basis for his want to control internet content. He urged Canadians to look for the facts themselves, sending them to a particular page in a government report that he said would reveal the truth about the carbon tax's economic impact. Poilievre's message to Trudeau was straightforward. Let Canadians examine the facts for themselves and determine who was presenting the truth.
The NDP, the tax hike will be bigger than any increases in the rebate, and therefore people will be bigger, the average families in all the provinces will be bigger net losers under this tax than they were before.
The debate became more heated when Poilievre volunteered to transmit the report to Trudeau, hinting that the Prime Minister had either not read it or was purposely disregarding the facts. The event emphasized the stark contrast between the two presidents on the issue of climate change and taxes. Trudeau remained calm, answered by emphasizing the government's commitment to combating climate change. He said that a strategy for the future of the economy could be connected to a plan to tackle climate change. Trudeau chastised the Conservative Party for failing to provide a realistic strategy to solve the environmental catastrophe, hinting that their approach would hurt workers and the economy in the long run. He cited investments from large corporations such as Volkswagen and Rio Tinto as proof that the government's environmental measures were attracting industry and generating employment in Canada.
He is going to cancel checks that he will prevent from delivering to Canadians right across the country. 8 out of 10 Canadians households get more money than they pay in carbon pricing in the provinces in which they apply. In Alberta, $1,800 a year to a family of 4.
But Poilievre was not pleased. He blasted Trudeau's environmental strategy as little more than disguised tax proposals, having failed to reach a single carbon reduction objective since its start. He discussed the Prime Minister of shifting the responsibility of climate change onto working-class Canadians, who had no option but to drive and heat their houses. Poilievre stated that rather than taxing regular Canadians, Trudeau should set a sound example by limiting his own extravagant lifestyle. The discussion became more personal when Trudeau questioned Poilievre's capacity to persuade Canadians that quitting the battle against climate change would benefit them. Trudeau hinted that Poilievre was employing fancy jargon to hide the facts, but Canadians would be okay with it. According to Trudeau, the Canadian people knew that the environment and the economy were intimately intertwined, and that the government's policies were required for long-term success.
With the support of the NDP, the tax hike will be bigger than any increases in the rebate, and therefore people will be bigger, the average families in all the provinces will be bigger net losers under this tax than they were before. With Canadians unable to eat, heat, and house themselves, will the Prime Minister cancel his plan to hike the tax on April 1st?
Poilievre, on the other hand, said unequivocally that his primary responsibility will be to clean up Trudeau's mess. He launched a harsh assessment of the Prime Minister's track record, claiming that despite billions of dollars spent on different programs, such as the Infrastructure Bank and housing affordability, Trudeau had nothing to show for it. The Infrastructure Bank had not finished a single project, and the Trans Mountain Pipeline's cost had risen much above its initial estimate. Meanwhile, house costs had risen, placing homeownership more out of reach for many Canadians. Poilievre's rhetorical remark rang around the chamber. Why did things get worse as Trudeau spent more? Trudeau, looking unmoved, defended his government's record by distinguishing between the Liberals and the Conservatives. He reminded the House of Conservative Party's history of cutting important services, including veterans' benefits, child poverty measures, and housing programs. Trudeau countered that these measures did not promote economic development, but instead harmed Canadians' well-being. In contrast, he said that the Liberal administration had prioritized middle-class investment, tax cuts for those in the most need, and tax increases for the top 1%. He noted that the Conservatives had voted against policies such as dental treatment for low-income children, emphasizing the ideological gulf between the two parties.
Speaker, it would be slightly more credible to hear the Conservatives concerned about the challenges Canadians are facing if they hadn't stood and voted against more spaces in childcare, voted against our dental care program that 2 million seniors have signed up for and has now delivered close to 100,000 dental appointments for seniors in just 22 days, Mr. Speaker.
As the conversation concluded, it became evident that Trudeau and Poilievre's disagreement was about more than simply policy, but profoundly differing views on Canada's future. Trudeau's emphasis on climate change and social investment contrasted sharply with Poilievre's emphasis on fiscal restraint and skepticism of the government's environmental plans. The argument left little space for compromise, with each leader firmly defending their stances against the other. Trudeau saw the battle against climate change as not just a moral obligation, but also an opportunity for economic development and job creation. He thought that investing in clean technologies and green energy would ensure Canada's economic future while also protecting the environment for future generations. His goal was a modern, ecologically concerned Canada that would set an example on a global scale.
Against it, Mr. Speaker, to prevent it from delivering the help Canadians need. We will keep going on delivering support for Canadians, and we will keep going on putting more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians with our price on pollution that supports Canadian families and successfully fights climate change.
Hear, hear.
Poilievre, on the other hand, had a more conventional conservative approach to the government's involvement in the economy. He said that Trudeau's policies failed to address climate change, but also made life more difficult for ordinary Canadians. Poilievre positioned himself as a supporter of the working class, which was being squeezed by growing taxes and living expenses. He aimed to break through the bluster and concentrate on real measures that would decrease living costs and return more money to Canadian wallets.
8 out of 10 families get more back through the price on pollution, through the Canada carbon rebate. The reality is, if one wants to talk about longer-term and broader economic consequences of a price on pollution, you have to talk about the cost of inaction. You have to talk about the benefits of investing.
Finally, the discussion emphasized the rising split in Canadian politics, with climate change and economic policy at the heart of the conflict. Trudeau and Poilievre's dispute in the House of Commons was a microcosm of the larger debate for Canada's future path. It was unclear whether the public would tilt towards Trudeau's progressive, climate-focused plans or Poilievre's conservative, economic-driven approach. What was evident was that the future years would be fraught with political fights as both leaders competed for the favor of the Canadian people.